This episode is a special collaboration between Mythic Albion and Richard Clements, creator of The History Alchemist, a Substack exploring hidden histories and forgotten narratives. A link to his work can be found in the description of this episode. Britain's roads are ancient, with many predating the Romans. Some follow forgotten tracks thought to be thousands of years old. There are over 240,000 miles of roads in Great Britain, and most of them are in small local areas and rural lanes. And according to folklore, not everyone travelling those roads are alive. The earliest roads began as paths formed naturally by repeated use, following the trails made by animals and through forests, swamps and mountains. As human civilization transitioned from a nomadic lifestyle to settled communities, the need for transport of goods, communications and governing large areas became essential. They enabled people to get from one place to another, which continues today. But roads can be a lonely place. One wrong turn might mean encountering a stranger, losing one's bearings or wondering if they're on the right path. Before the world around us was illuminated by artificial light and fast-moving cars, travelling at night was not something to be done lightly. If you were lucky and it was a clear moonlit night, and you were accompanied by a lantern, then you were given some reassurances. But some roads seemed to be swallowed up by the darkness, as if entering a deep underwater trench. Different sounds would be heard, and have you ever wondered why familiar landmarks and trails just seem different after nightfall? As if something has altered reality after sunset. There were routes carried out by pilgrims and merchants. There were times where great armies walked through, and all were just the briefest of moments in the timeline of that road. And through generation to generation, certain lanes would gain a reputation. Crossroads would develop superstition and strange customs. Some roads were so old that the bones themselves just became part of the dust. In this episode of Mythic Albion, we explore the strange relationship between roads, death and the supernatural in Britain. From corpse roads to phantom coaches and ghostly hitchhikers to crossroads, where the veil between worlds grows thin. And like roads themselves, some folklore never truly faded away. We may have switched from carriage to car, from horse to motorbike, and we traded lanterns for headlights. But there are many roads and not all are lit. Stories still persisted. People still wonder if they saw someone standing by the roadside, or just a trick of the lights. And some of these roads could prove dangerous, whether you were outside a car or within. People finishing journeys convinced that they have experienced something beyond human comprehension. Before the invention of cars, before railways, and even before the tradition of burying the departed at cemeteries, the dead travelled. In a time where smaller communities may have had a small church or chapel, but no means of burial, the dead would have to be taken to another church that had the means of a resting place, which meant carrying the dead for several miles, across hills and moors, through forests and valleys. These routes would become known as corpse roads, and even back then, these paths were already ancient. In parts of Yorkshire, Cumbria, Lancashire and Dartmoor, some communities were many miles from the nearest church. A person in a village dies and they are placed in a coffin to be carried by family members, neighbours and appointed bearers, sometimes for hours and sometimes for miles, irrespective of the weather or time of day. These journeys would become woven into local memory. These routes would be a kind of dead zone. The idea of having to make the journey might sound arduous and sinister, but originally there was nothing strange about them. It was just an event that had to be carried out. And like a lot of folklore, practicality precedes stories. Generations of people began to believe that the roads themselves absorbed something of the dead. The repeated passage of funeral processions would leave marks on the landscape, a sort of spiritual imprint breathing like that of a lingering presence. a corpse road became something to fear after sunset. In some areas it was forbidden to walk these roads because they belonged to the dead and the dead alone. Farmers could not block them up, and to move across them was considered deeply unlucky. And for those foolish or unlucky enough to find themselves on these paths, travellers would report of strange lights moving along the path. Red lights and white lights, some the size of night bugs and some that seemed the size of a roaring fire. A common phenomenon in Wales due to the tradition of old paths used by funeral parties. Others spoke of hearing distant bells carried on the wind. Then there were those that believed a funeral procession was approaching through the darkness. Stepping aside out of respect, they would note that all present were dressed in black from head to toe, bearing the weight of the coffin. The procession would appear to glide through the air, nothing save for skeletal hands holding the casket. And then turning back, there is nothing there, only mist and the sound of the traveller breathing. One Yorkshire legend tells of a farmer returning home one evening. As he crossed a lonely track, a procession emerged from the fog. Men and women dressed in dark clothing, faces solemn and pale, discernible from the mist. At the centre was a coffin. The farmer removes his hat as a sign of respect and stood to one side. They passed him, but this felt strange. It felt unnaturally cold. There were no footsteps and no sound. Not even shadows were cast. The figures moved like drifting clouds, and within moments they disappeared back into the darkness. According to local belief, the farmer had just witnessed a death before it had occurred. Was this an omen or a warning, or a glimpse of something beyond time and the living? Today, a journey to the cemetery is short, comfortable and respectful. Many of these old paths have been swallowed up by modern roads and fields. Some became public footpaths, but some still survive and can be found on a map today. And perhaps there are still some that exist which are not marked. While there are hundreds of thousands of miles of road in Britain, a corpse road can go on for eternity, through time and distance. If the dead travelled Britain's corpse roads, then perhaps it should come as no surprise that some were said to continue their journey long after burial. But not with wandering ghosts or phantom hitchhikers, but with entire carriages, ghostly coaches emerging from mist and darkness, sometimes thundering and sometimes trotting across the countryside, as though carrying passengers to a one-way only destination beyond this world. Long before the arrival of motor cars, Britain's roads belonged to horses, as evident by the narrow lanes connecting villages. Mail coaches would thunder through the night. Travelling coaches and their cargo would traverse through forests, over moors and across desolate countryside. But where people went, ghost stories would follow. And many of these tales centre around what will become known as the death coach. Stories of these spectral apparitions were common in the 19th and 18th century. There were variations of the descriptions of these things. Fire-breathing horses with eyes like hot coals, pulling jet-black carriages with black curtains. The sight and sound of such a coach was said to herald death. In the early 18th century, Reverend Richard Dodge was the vicar of Talland, a hamlet on the south coast of Cornwall. It was said that the local area was afflicted by a phantom coach pulled by headless horses. Dodge and another vicar decided to hold a vigil one night on a moor, said to be a common beacon for sightings. But nothing came, so they decided to head home to try another time. As Dodge attempted to guide his horse home, it would not track back down the road that led them here, stubbornly ignoring his commands to go on. Dodge gave in and turned the horse around, and what he saw next was terrifying. The phantom coach had appeared out of nothing, as seamlessly as the evening mist. The shape of a coachman was standing over something on the ground, and Dodge realised it was the other vicar, lying prone and scared out of his wits' end. Dodge kicked the sides of the horse and galloped ahead. The coachman, startled, seemed to retreat into himself, and he appeared on top of the carriage. The carriage then also retreated on itself, not turning around, but pulling into the mist like the flash of a fading photograph. It was posited that Dodge in fact was moonlighting and engaging in smuggling, that the story of the death coach was a convenient yarn used to scare away prying eyes from the area. Perhaps the vicar did scare something away. Mayhap it was smugglers themselves, the darkness playing with the human mind to make something seem more ethereal than it actually was. Smugglers themselves used the brandy bottle tree in Devon for brandy smuggling, painting the carriage and horses with luminescent paint, also leaving the horses without heads. It is easy to see how this could be mistaken for something more supernatural in the light. Mayhap it was smugglers themselves that perpetuated the notion of phantom coaches to better hide their activities. Another legend in Lincolnshire tells of a man walking along the road north of Scorby village. From somewhere came the distant sound of wheels, the rhythmic beat of hooves, the rattling of harness chains. He was taken aback by seeing a phantom coach and horse gallop by, yet the moment the carriage passed, the sounds ceased. All sound around him ceased. The horses galloped in silence. The wheels turned without touching the ground. The driver, sitting motionless, hooded. All of time seemed to stop for a moment, yet that hooded face turned and stared at the man. And then it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Deciding to go in pursuit, he saw that the coach ran directly into a lake without hesitation or pause. The man, without thinking about what he himself was doing, also walked into the lake without pause, where he inevitably drowned. The last thing he heard was the sound of callous laughter from the coachman, clear as day under the waters. There have been numerous tales about deathly coaches, sometimes escorted by deathly black hounds. Some folklorists believe that these coaches may preserve fragments of older traditions such as the wild hunt, ancient beliefs that the dead travel together beneath the cover of darkness. And what is death if not just another journey, a crossing, the final road travelled alone? And maybe that is the most terrifying aspect of the stories of phantom coaches and their deathly cargo. It's not so much fear of death itself, but where the final destination of that carriage might be. That the appearance of these apparitions were not random, but a warning, an omen of something rarely seen glimpsed behind the curtain. A recurring motif in British folklore is the notion of certain places that sit somewhere between one place and another. A sort of liminal space, seen in doorways, bridges, river crossings and shorelines. But more than any of them, crossroads. At first glance, a crossroad might seem quite mundane. Simply the meeting of two roads, a place to choose to either turn left or right or go straight on. To continue a journey or even turn back if one so wishes. Yet for centuries, crossroads were regarded with suspicion and outright fear, because of that choice that they offered, being neither here nor there, and consequently, crossroads have gathered stories for centuries. And while not always being sinister, death is common in most tales. During the medieval ages, it was considered that executed criminals, unidentified strangers or suicide victims were buried at crossroads, as burial at consecrated grounds was deemed unbefitting for this particular category of souls. Being interred at crossroads was seen as acceptable for those outside the order of things. Because a crossroad presented four possible routes, then surely a spirit would also become confused, unable to find home or a resting place, doomed to walk the earth in a state of limbo. It was also thought that the dead would not rest easy due to the volume of traffic on a day-to-day basis from the living. Gibbets were often seen displayed at Crossroads, high enough to be seen by all approaching from a distance. And thus, Crossroads represented a sort of grisly graveyard on the road. Travellers would report seeing strange figures standing motionless in the middle of the crossroad in the dead of night, or phantom coaches vanishing as soon as they crossed over, as if passing through an invisible veil. Yet ghosts and the dead were not the only ones that would gather here. Through much of the Middle Ages, Crossroads were also associated with witchcraft. In folklore, it was said that hags and crones would meet there under the cover of darkness. Spells would be cast and curses invoked, and bargains would be made of summoning something entirely supernatural. And if boundaries could be weakened, something else could cross through. And unsurprisingly, the devil himself could come through those intersections where the veil was most thin. Countless legends tell of travellers meeting a mysterious stranger at a lonely junction, well dressed and well spoken, wrapped in a cloak and a wide-brimmed hat obscuring most of his features. The conversation seeming innocent enough, and then the traveller not realising he is being unpicked, laying his soul bare. And the devil knows what the heart desires: power, knowledge, revenge, desire, the fulfillment of a wish. The price, of course, is always the same. Crossroads are not merely places upon a map. They were thresholds, boundaries, meeting points between the known and the unknown. But these are all old stories, surely nothing more than an old wives' tale. Because there would be nothing to fear about standing alone at a crossroads at midnight, seeing the road stretch in 4 directions under moonlight, the darkness deepening, the winds seeming to groan louder, different sounds jostling to be heard, and for a moment you may not help but feel that something may be watching from beyond the edge of a lantern light, because Crossroads have always asked the same question: which way will you go? If Crossroads serve as a reminder of Britain's ancient fear of the dead, then the Hairy Hands of Dartmoor reveal something equally unsettling. The fear of what might be waiting for us on the road ahead. There are many places in Britain suited to ghost stories, but none more so than in Dartmoor. A vast expanse of wilderness with sudden mists and lonely roads, twisting and turning between ancient tors and desolate moorland. For centuries, people have spoken of strange things upon that moor: black dogs, ghostly figures, phantom lights. But most chilling of all, the Hairy Hands. This particular legend is set near Postbridge in Dartmoor on a road now known as the B3212. According to legends and witnesses, a pair of disembodied hands would suddenly appear and grab at steering wheels of cars or the handlebars of motorcycles in an attempt to force the victim off the road. The hands are said to be described as large and hairy, as if belonging to a prehistoric simian, and in some cases, the hands are entirely invisible. The vehicle will be forced off the road towards a ditch, wall, or the edge of the road, the driver struggling to wrestle control back. Sometimes the driver would succeed, and sometimes not. Since the beginning of the 20th century, drivers and cyclists have reported unusual accidents along the road between Postbridge and Two Bridges. In most cases, the victims reported of their vehicles jolting or swerving violently, as if a passenger had lost control of their senses, leaned over to grab the wheel and force it off the road. Many people survived, but in June 1921, a medical officer working at Dartmoor prison was killed when he lost control of his motorbike. Several weeks later, a coach similarly lost control, with several passengers being thrown out of their seats. On August 26, 1921, an army captain was navigating a lonely stretch of road when he suddenly felt the presence of another gripping the handlebars. While forced off the road, only through sheer force of will did the army captain avoid something more fatal. The army captain describes the incident as if someone had somehow stood before him while on a moving bike and was trying to turn the handlebars. These encounters were not always restricted to moving vehicles. In 1924, a woman camping on the moor with her husband in their caravan claimed that a pair of hairy hands had appeared, thudding on the side of the caravan, violently jerking at the handle of the door. This encounter only stopped once she held up a cross to the window. Skeptics have offered many an explanation, that these were simply people driving too quickly on an unfamiliar stretch of road, or that they were the victims of bad engineering, that it was fog or fatigue, a momentary lapse in concentration. Yet the consistency of the story remains the same. Different people in different decades with the same story and the same description. Maybe the hairy hands belongs to the victim of a long forgotten accident, a restless spirit doomed to haunt that stretch of road forever. Others claim it is something much older, a malevolent entity tied to the moor itself, a force that came before the creation of the road itself, something that resented travellers forging paths through its domain. And in Dartmoor, that possibility feels strangely familiar. The moor has always had an untamed quality about it, a sense of something terribly old existing under that stretch of road. Today, people travelling across Dartmoor on a particularly foggy night speak of having an uneasy feeling, a sensation of being watched, of not being entirely alone, as if an unseen passenger were accompanying them. And when the visibility drops, with the rain lashing against the windscreen with the road ahead disappearing into the mist, one cannot help but glance nervously at the steering wheel and wonder, what if another pair of hands suddenly reached for it? Bluebell Hill is a piece of Kentish folklore that is so ingrained in the area that many people know the story more than they do of the road itself. And there are a few stories more enduring than that of the phantom hitchhiker, a lone traveller on a deserted road, a figure standing in the darkness, and a journey that ends with a disappearing passenger that no one can explain. It lies between the idyllic town of Maidstone and Rochester, and there is little to suggest that anything out of the ordinary or otherworldly is apparent. There certainly isn't a feeling of isolation or bleakness often associated with the moors of Dartmoor. A busy stretch of road, to many it is just another road. But Bluebell Hill is a chalk hill rising from the surrounding countryside, and most journeys are entirely uneventful. But even so, ask around the locals in the nearby area and you may get something entirely different. According to local and Kentish lore, in the fall of 1974, Maurice Goodenough was making his way home when he was convinced his car had struck something. Worse, had struck someone. Immediately slamming on the brakes, he got out of the car and walked back, where he found nothing. There was no damage to his car, no injured pedestrian and no body. Yet the incident felt very real to Mr. Goodenough, with the feeling of having hit someone sitting deep within him. As the years passed, this account would appear in books, magazines and newspaper articles. Many have said that they believed a woman roams these roads. Another account tells of a motorist who picked up a young woman late at night. She spoke little during the journey and her appearance seemed dulled and muted, like watching something on the TV that had been dialed down to almost black and white. All she would relay was an address. And as the driver would approach the destination, he would look to the passenger seat and find it entirely empty. It is said that something appearing can scare a person. Imagine something suddenly vanishing that was always there. Stories like these have been reported for decades and by different people. A young woman, a lonely road, and a sudden disappearance. There is some belief that these encounters are connected to a real-life tragedy. In July of 1965, 3 young women lost their lives in a collision while travelling to a hen party. Of the 3 women, Judith Lingard was due to get married the following day. While tragic and seemingly incidental to the reports, it is easy to see how people began to connect the accident with the various stories people have had on that road. Of course, like many a ghost story, skeptics will point out that Bluebell Hill is a place people would expect to be haunted. A well-known tragedy is tied to it. That perhaps drivers interpret shadows and fleeting glimpses through the lens of local folklore and an overactive imagination, with memory filling in the details afterwards. Yet there is something fascinating about phantom hitchhiker stories, and they are not unique to just Kent or even Britain. The roads might change, as do the names, but the theme is always the same. A traveller encounters someone who should not be there. Someone caught between destinations, caught between life and death. A lone traveller in a stark chance meeting. The next time your headlights illuminate a solitary figure standing by the roadside, you may find yourself wondering, should you stop or should you keep driving? Because on Britain's haunted roads, not every traveller is trying to get home. And so our journey comes to an end, not at a castle or within an ancient ruin, but upon a road itself. And roads rarely have endings, just towns, countryside and landscape sitting in between. There are many miles of roads in our lands, but they measure time as much as they measure distance, existing long before kingdoms began to rise and long after empires fell. The roads of Britain have carried countless travellers, kings and beggars, merchants and pilgrims, soldiers marching to war, a solitary boot kicking up dust for the 1000th time, and with another 1,000 years of boots to follow. And what we have learned is not every traveller reaches their destination, and not every journey truly ends. It is said a person is forgotten within 2 generations, but roads will never forget. And perhaps that is why so many stories have emerged, telling of phantom funerals and spectral processions, of the dead continuing their final journey beneath moonlight or hopelessly lost at one of the many crossroads that exist, in locations that can be said to be remote even for spirits. And for Crossroads, the more remote the better. A place where the living and the spiritual overlap, a place of spellcasting, of witches and devils, the final resting place for the wicked and unfortunate alike. Then came phantom coaches, those silent carriages travelling through mist and darkness, harbingers of doom with passengers bound for parts unknown. Whether it be a corpse road, a phantom coach, a haunted crossroad or a lonely hitchhiker waiting in the rain, the message remains the same. Roads are liminal places, measuring space and time, existing between the beginning and the end, between departure and arrival, between one world and the next. Maybe that is why they continue to haunt our imaginations and thoughts. Every bend conceals what is ahead, and what is ahead can disappear into the unknown. And on a certain night, when the fog hangs low across the fields and the rain drums softly on the windscreen, the old stories are still travelling and still wandering, still searching for the road home. If you like today's episode of Mythic Albion, be sure to leave a like and review. It helps others find their way back to the living. And as we leave Britain's haunted roads, our next journey takes us across the Irish Sea, to a land where giants strode across the coastline, where children transformed into swans, where warriors battled monsters beneath the ancient skies, and where myth and landscape remain inseparable. Next time on Mythic Albion, we journey into the myths and legends of Northern Ireland, from Finn McCool and the Giant's Causeway to the tragic children of Lear, to the heroes, spirits and ancient tales that have shaped Ireland's folklore for centuries. Because beyond the haunted roads of Britain lie stories even older than the roads themselves. Stories born in an age of giants and legends that refuse to die. So until next time, walk wisely and beware the dreamlike sound of hooves emerging from the blackness of the fog.